HOA fines me $10,000, and I took them to court. I never imagined a quiet Saturday morning could flip my entire life upside down. The sun was soft, the neighborhood silent, and I walked to my mailbox expecting the usual stack of bills and useless adverts. But instead, a thick white envelope sat at the bottom like a brick. Across the front, in red letters that almost screamed at me, were the words, "Final Notice." My stomach tightened. I tore it open on the spot, and as I flipped through the pages inside, my pulse spiked. According to the HOA, I owed $10,000 in accumulated fines. $10,000. For a second, I honestly wondered if they had the wrong address. The list of violations didn't even sound real. Unauthorized construction, disturbing the community, non-compliance with appearance standards. I blinked at each line, feeling like someone was playing a twisted joke on me. I hadn't even changed anything about my property. No new paint, no new structure, not even a new flower pot. How could they come up with violations out of thin air? And more importantly, how had this imaginary nonsense reached $10,000? My heart thudded as I kept flipping through the pages. There was no warning letter attached. No previous notice. Nothing. Just a debt slapped directly in my face. The fear hit first. What if they really tried to enforce it? What if they tried to take my home? Then came the confusion. Then anger. A creeping, electric anger that simmered under my skin. That was when I saw the signature at the bottom, Karen Whitmore. Of course, Karen, the HOA president. The same woman who treated the entire neighborhood like her personal kingdom. The same woman who had once knocked on my door because my trash can was an inch too close to the curb. The same woman who acted like she had a camera on every roof. A cold feeling spread through my chest as I stared at her name. Something about this wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. Karen had targeted me again. But this time, she'd gone too far. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a simple mistake. It felt calculated. Personal. Like she wanted something. But what? And why now? As I stood there gripping the letter, 1,000 emotional questions punched through my mind. Why didn't they call me? Why didn't they send earlier notices? Why didn't anyone ask me about the supposed construction? Was this a setup? Was someone trying to push me out? Was there something bigger going on here? The fear mixed with indignation until it settled into a firm, burning emotion, determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. $10,000 wasn't a fine, it was a threat. And if Karen really thought I would just bow my head and pay for something I didn't do, she was in for a surprise. That entire weekend, I couldn't think straight. I reread the letter at least 30 times. Every word felt like an attack. I replayed every possible scenario. Had someone lied? Had someone taken a random photo of my yard? Had Karen forged something? And each time the questions circled back to the same unsettling possibility. Karen might be abusing her position. By Sunday evening, I felt a shift inside me. The fear had drained away, replaced with clarity. There was only one thing I could do: confront her. On Monday morning, I walked into the HOA office with the letter clutched in my hand, my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. Karen sat behind the desk, legs crossed, sipping her coffee like she had spent all morning waiting to ruin someone's day. The moment she looked up and saw me, she smiled, but not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smirk that curled at the edges, smug and expectant. "Well," she said, placing her cup down, "finally came to handle your responsibilities?" Her tone scraped against my nerves. I laid the letter on her desk. "This is a mistake," I said. "These violations aren't real." She didn't even look at the paper. She just leaned back, arms folded. "Everything is documented. If you refuse to pay, the HOA has the right to place a lien on your home." A lien. Over fake violations. I felt my throat go tight. What construction did I supposedly do? I asked, fighting to keep my voice level. She tapped her fingers on the desk. "Your illegal structure in the backyard." I frowned. "My shed. The one that's been there for years." "Unapproved," she replied sharply. "It was approved under the previous board," I said. I remembered the approval clearly. I had the papers somewhere. "Not in my records," she said, her eyes gleaming. The instant she said it, something clicked. This wasn't about a shed. This was about power, control, maybe even revenge. Karen was the kind of person who hated being contradicted, and I had disagreed with her more than once at past meetings. But enough to fabricate violations? Enough to fabricate fines? Enough to push me toward losing my home? As I walked out of the HOA office, my heart hammered with anger. Something was deeply wrong. This wasn't the behavior of someone protecting a neighborhood. This was the behavior of someone ruling it. And I couldn't help but think, why me? Why now? What did Karen stand to gain from this? There was a moment, just a flicker, where fear whispered, maybe you should just pay. Maybe you can't win. But another voice rose louder, stronger, a voice that had been silent too long. No, I wasn't going to let anyone bully me out of my home. I knew there was more to this. There had to be. And if Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one. That was the moment everything changed. The moment a simple letter turned into a war. The moment I decided I wasn't backing down, even if it meant taking the HOA and Karen to court. I had no idea then how deep the corruption went. I had no idea how dark the truth was. But I was about to find out, and it would shake the entire neighborhood. On Monday evening, my mind was still spinning. It wasn't just the fine, it was the way Karen had responded. Cold, confident, almost rehearsed. Like she already knew I would come. Like the letter was always meant to provoke me, not inform me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was hiding behind her smug smile. That night, I tore through my old files like a detective trying to solve a case. Boxes of documents, old HOA emails, house purchase papers, anything that could help me prove Karen wrong. Hours passed, frustration mounting, until finally, at the bottom of a box I hadn't opened in years, I found it. A thin yellow folder labeled Shed Approval. I opened it with trembling hands. There it was. The original HOA approval letter from years ago, stamped, signed, and dated. And ironically, signed by the HOA president at that time, Mrs. Donnelly, a sweet elderly woman who had moved away long before Karen took over. I stared at the paper, anger pulsing through my veins. Karen lied. She knew this structure was approved. She either removed the approval from their records or pretended it never existed. But why would she erase something so harmless? Why target me? The question burned in my mind. The next morning, I went door to door asking neighbors if they had ever been fined unfairly. What started as curiosity turned into an avalanche. By the third house, I had already spoken to 2 homeowners who had received suspicious fines in the past 6 months. Fines that appeared out of nowhere, fines with exaggerated amounts, fines signed only by Karen. One neighbor, Mr. Diaz, spoke in a low whisper like he wasn't sure who might be listening. "You're not the only one," he said. "She fined us for a supposed fence violation, but our fence was approved when we bought the house. She threatened to double the fine if we argued." "She doubled yours too?" I asked. He nodded. "We paid because we didn't want trouble." My chest tightened. How many others had paid? How many had been too scared to speak up? Then Mr. Diaz leaned closer. "Look, people are talking. Karen's cousin is a real estate agent. Some say she's been pushing homeowners out so her cousin can buy houses cheap and flip them. 2 families moved out this year after getting slammed with big fines. A real estate scam. Inside the HOA. Using fake violations to push people out." Everything clicked. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system, a calculated plan. And I had become her next target. By noon, I had spoken to 7 neighbors. 4 had experienced suspicious fines. 2 had moved. 1 was planning to move. The entire pattern was undeniable, like seeing the shape of a puzzle after putting in the last piece. I needed proof. Hard proof. So I took everything. My shed approval letter, copies of neighbor testimonies, printouts of the fines, dates, amounts, and I contacted an attorney. When I explained everything to him, he didn't even look surprised. "This isn't new," he said. "Some HOA presidents think they're running a private kingdom. But if what you're saying is accurate, this goes beyond abuse of authority. This is fraud. Fraud." The word echoed in my head. He reviewed the documents quietly for a long moment. Then he said, "We can build a case. And if your neighbors are willing to testify, Karen might be in serious trouble." For the first time since receiving the letter, something inside me eased. I wasn't alone. And now there was a path forward. But things escalated fast. The day after the lawsuit was filed, Karen showed up at my house. I had barely opened the door before she marched up my walkway, her face red with fury. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She simply yelled, "How dare you?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "Stay off my property, Karen. You think you can sue the HOA and get away with it?" she snapped. "I'm suing you," I corrected. "Not the HOA." She froze, stunned for a moment. Then her face twisted. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." "No, I said calmly. I'm stopping one. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to claw the words off my face. But then she spun around, stomped down the driveway, and yelled, "You'll regret this," before storming off. I watched her leave, my heart pounding. But instead of fear, I felt something else, confirmation. Karen was scared, desperate, and desperate people reveal the truth when pushed. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors for days. People whispered outside, exchanged glances at mailboxes, even called me asking what was happening. Some were terrified. Others relieved someone finally fought back. But Karen, she avoided everyone. And when HOA meetings rolled around, she canceled 2 in a row with no explanation. The tension built like a storm waiting to explode. And then the day of the court hearing arrived. The courthouse buzzed with a quiet tension the morning of the hearing. I walked in with my attorney beside me, holding a folder so thick it felt like carrying a brick. People from my neighborhood filled the benches, some curious, some anxious, some angry. They weren't there for entertainment. They were there because they had suffered too. And at the center of all this was Karen. When she entered the courtroom, she looked different. Her usual confidence was cracked. Her walk wasn't steady, it was stiff, rigid. She held her purse tightly, her jaw clenched, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for allies and finding none. Even the other HOA board members avoided her gaze. The judge entered, and the room grew silent. The hearing began with my attorney laying out the timeline. The sudden fines, the lack of prior notices, the illegal amounts, the fabricated violations, the missing approval records. Then he presented the smoking gun, the original shed approval letter signed years ago. Karen's face drained of color. She shook her head, but she didn't stand or object. She just sat there, shrinking. Then came the witnesses. One by one, my neighbors stood and testified. Mr. Diaz described the fence fine. Mrs. Hernandez explained how Karen threatened to triple her fine if she asked for a hearing. A younger couple talked about receiving fines for landscape violations, even though Karen had never inspected their yard. Then came something unexpected. A former HOA board member, someone who had resigned abruptly a year earlier, stepped forward. He looked nervous at first, glancing at Karen like she might explode. Then he said, "I have emails." The entire room shifted. Emails where Karen instructed us to be strict with specific homeowners. She said some properties were better sold than kept, and told us to make it difficult for certain residents. "Do you have copies?" the judge asked. "Yes," he said, hands trembling slightly as he held them up. "I kept everything." As those emails were entered into evidence, Karen finally snapped. She stood, pointing at him. "You're lying. You were fired because you were incompetent." "You quit," my attorney said calmly. "He has the resignation letter." Karen froze again. The judge's expression hardened. "Ms. Whitmore, do you have any explanation for these emails? Or for the missing approval records? Or the sudden pattern of excessive fines?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. And then, shockingly, she said, "I don't recall." My attorney stepped forward. "Let me refresh your memory." He displayed a timeline of the inflated fines, the sudden resignations within the board, the drop in home values, and the quick purchases made by Karen's cousin following homeowner departures. It was all there, in plain sight. A hush fell over the courtroom. It felt like the air itself was holding still. For the first time, Karen broke. Her shoulders slumped. She looked small, fragile, cornered. Then she said quietly, "This isn't fair." But fairness had nothing to do with what she had done. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of every abused homeowner in that room. "Ms. Whitmore, based on the evidence presented, it is clear you used your position to issue fraudulent fines, manipulate HOA procedures, and coerce homeowners for personal gain. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff." The room erupted into a quiet wave of relieved murmurs. The judge continued, "All fines are to be dismissed immediately. The HOA is to refund any payments made under false pretenses. Ms. Whitmore is removed from her position effective immediately and will be subject to further investigation." Karen's face twisted, shock, anger, disbelief, confusion, all crashing together. She didn't look like the queen of the neighborhood anymore. She looked like someone whose power had finally been torn away. As she was escorted out for questioning, she didn't look back at anyone. Not even once. I stood there frozen, the reality sinking in. This wasn't just a win. It was justice. It was every neighbor finally breathing again. It was every bullied homeowner finally feeling seen. The storm was over. But inside me, a quiet reflection began. The strange thing about victory is that it doesn't always hit you all at once. As I stepped out of the courthouse, I expected to feel triumphant, overwhelmed with relief, maybe even euphoric. But instead, I felt still, quiet, like my mind was trying to catch up with everything that had happened. The neighborhood members who had come to support me gathered around. Some clapped me on the back. Some hugged me. Some simply said thank you, with a softness that carried years of stress behind it. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were people who had been living under the same fear, the same intimidation, the same silent pressure that Karen had used to control the community. And now it was finally over. As I walked home alone, the afternoon sunlight looked different. Warmer, softer, like the neighborhood itself was relieved. I passed house after house, and each one felt like it was breathing easier now. The weight Karen had held over everyone wasn't visible, but it had been real. And now that weight was gone. I kept thinking about justice. Not the kind written in legal books, but the kind you feel. The kind that comes when you stand up to something bigger than you. Something darker. Something that seems impossible to fight. And yet somehow you win. But the victory also brought reflection. I thought about how close I had been to giving up. How easy it would have been to just pay the fine and avoid the trouble. How many people had paid because they didn't want conflict. How many had moved out because they felt powerless. How many had been hurt by Karen before I ever received that letter. I thought about those families. Those quiet sacrifices. Those silent defeats. And suddenly, the victory felt even more important. Not just for me, but for every homeowner who had ever been manipulated by someone using authority the wrong way. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I stared at the shed through my back window. The same shed that had sparked all this chaos. The same shed Karen claimed was illegal. The same shed she tried to use as justification to destroy my peace. And there it stood, harmless, steady, unchanged, a symbol of something much bigger now. It represented truth, persistence, courage, proof that standing your ground matters. I poured a glass of water and sat with the quiet. For the first time in weeks, my house didn't feel heavy. The walls didn't feel like they were closing in. My home felt like mine again. But reflection also brought questions. Why had Karen chosen this path? Power, greed, ego, a desire to control everything around her? Or something deeper, something twisted inside her that made her believe she could treat people however she wanted and never face consequences? I didn't have answers, and maybe I never would. But one thing was clear. Karen believed she could get away with it. She believed fear would silence people. She believed authority made her untouchable. But she was wrong. Days passed, and the neighborhood slowly shifted back to normal. People smiled more. Children played outside longer. Conversations happened freely without the fear of, what if Karen hears? For the first time in a long time, the community felt like a community again. Not a place ruled by paranoia and punishment. The HOA held an emergency election to replace Karen, and for the first time, people volunteered willingly. They wanted transparency, fairness, a fresh start. And as I watched everything unfold, I realized something important. Sometimes change begins with a single push. One person unwilling to stay silent. One person saying, no more. One person opening a door that everyone else was afraid to touch. I never wanted to be that person. I never expected to be. But life doesn't always ask you if you're ready. It simply puts you where you need to be. A week later, neighbors gathered in my yard for a small celebration. Someone brought food, another brought drinks, kids ran around laughing. And as I stood there watching everyone smile and talk like the weight of the past year hadn't existed, a warm feeling settled in my chest. This right here, was what Karen had tried to destroy. Community. Peace. Normalcy. She tried to replace it with fear. But fear didn't win. Justice did. Truth did. Courage did. At one point, Mrs. Hernandez approached me with tears in her eyes. She hugged me tightly and said, "You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us." Her words hit deep, because she was right. This wasn't just my story. It was ours. As the sun set that evening, I looked again at my shed, standing quietly, harmlessly, proudly in the backyard. And I smiled. Karen had tried to take $10,000 from me. But in the end, I took her entire operation down. And I protected every homeowner she tried to exploit. Some battles choose us. This one did. And I'm grateful I fought it. Because now, every time I walk through my neighborhood, I feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. And no HOA villain, not even a Karen, can take that away.